I think one thing we have to look at with the development of war is not only what happens immediately in that situation, but what happens environmentally to people afterwards. That's obvious in the case of nuclear war with fallout and its after effects. We have in Iraq today, and we know that from relief workers, a country where the infrastructure of that country has been so destroyed that children are now dying because the country can't cope with the effects.
Do you leave him in power as the alternative?
In Vietnam.
Do you leave him in power as the alternative?
Well, I mean, that's not, in a sense, a relative question. I mean, to take him out of power would have been the right thing, almost certainly. I mean, to conduct a war and then leave the dictator there was a double disaster.
You were talking, Colonel Warden, with enthusiasm about the capacity of smart weapons. Do you believe that we are entering an era where warfare will in effect be sanitized because you will be able to say no civilians are going to suffer, or so few that we can rely entirely on strategic air power, smart weapons, stealth bombs and so on? Is that the new age?
I don't think that you can take it quite to that absolute point, but what it seems to me that you can take it to from both a physical and from a moral point is that the precision weapons give us the first opportunity that we've had in several thousand years to reduce the barbarism of war and to reduce the suffering both of military people and of civilian people, and we need to pursue that.
I think there's a great danger here in overestimating the intelligence of these weapons, and I'm wondering how much, in fact, we're not subjected to management, news management and public relations with respect to this whole phenomenon. How do we describe what happened in Basra? If, in fact, the massive number of people were killed in Basra, upwards of 800,000, and that city was reduced to rubble, where are the smart weapons there?
800,000 is your...
There were massive numbers. The exact numbers, from what I understand, are not yet known. But the city was reduced to rubble. But it was not because of smart weaponry. It was because, again, of the use of the conventional carpet bombing.
You were nodding in agreement at some of what Mr. Pepper was saying at the beginning, just then.
I don't think I was. My own view is I think air bombardment is always going to be imprecise. Warfare is always going to be relatively barbaric. But I personally believe that in the Gulf, the Americans went further than anybody's ever been able to go in history in attempting to reduce to a minimum. That phrase collateral damage has been discredited because it involved a substantial number of lives. But if one accepts that all war is going to be bloody, I think it is remarkable the extent to which moral considerations are now allowed to influence targeting policy and the waging of war in a way they certainly weren't 30, 40, 50 years ago.
You, colonels, seem to believe or hope that we are getting closer to the possibility of sanitized war.
I would agree that we probably are never going to get there, but the fact that we may not get there fully certainly doesn't mean that it should not be a goal to move in that direction. I tell you, I'm a little bit surprised in many ways by the fact that the people that were properly passionate about the loss of lives 50 years ago now are not applauding the fact that we were able to conduct a war against a very significant power from a military standpoint a long ways away, bring that war to a conclusion in a very short period of time, and do it with far, far less suffering, civilian suffering and military suffering, than has ever occurred in a war of equal magnitude before. This should be applauded by the people who are opposed to war.
Is there a difficulty that we're slightly running away with ourselves here, Colonel? I say that with respect, because an awful lot of the wars that are fought don't have available to them smart weapons, because it's the Americans who've got the smart weapons. Take Bosnia. I mean, is there anything useful that air strategic power in such wars can do?
When we talk about war, we've got to define it in terms of some sort of organized conflict between two organizations, not necessarily a state. If you can define specific organization in some place like Bosnia or Serbia or whatever, then one could conceivably make a case that you could use precision weapons to some value.
Well, if the Bosnians and others aren't fighting wars, what are they doing? The significant part of what they're doing seems to be almost just at the interhuman passionate level, that it does not seem to have the kind of organization that we would normally think of as war. Yes.
Take on your point, because you said something that I've been really itching to say for some little time. And picking up Max Hastings' point, we will probably never, because man is imperfect, ever get to a point when we can have absolutely totally reliable weapons of war. And accidents will continue to happen. And what we have to do, surely, is to ensure, to the best of our ability, that war never breaks out. Now, you talk about smart weapons, we all talk about smart weapons. We're talking about the 3% of the world's population who have access to those weapons. Are the other 97% going to be left to fight it out among themselves? Could I just make one other point? One of the things that technology gives us in smart weapons is a video that can be played into the homes of the world 20 minutes, 2 hours after the raid has taken place. That is going to have, I may say, a remarkable effect on the morality and indeed on a way in which we conduct wars. And may I say, if we had had that sort of, if BBC Television and CNN had been on the Somme, how long would that battle have lasted?
It's a thought that takes me to perhaps a closing question area, which is this. Given the smart weaponry and its potential and its limitations, and the continuation of war by air and by other means, Adam Roberts, do we have in place now what we need, or all that is possible, to define what is proper, what is improper in warfare, or is there more to be done?
The laws of combat can have a mitigating effect, and I believe that they did in the Gulf War, but we shouldn't fool ourselves that they'll produce a completely clean war. And it's not just that there may be some malfunctions of weapons, but also, of course, there may be intelligence failures, and also, as we've seen, there may be cases where a civilian and a military target are all as one, like the power stations. The tragedies of war aren't got rid of easily, and we must also remember that in this war, in the Gulf, there wasn't a situation where the coalition were desperate and with their backs to the wall against a superior and technologically advanced adversary, as was the case in the Second World War. So it was easier to observe rules for us in this case than it was in that earlier case.
Air Chief Marshal.
I have my own idealism as a military man, and that is an ideal, which is unattainable, that we will be able to deter most wars, deter tyrants from starting wars, from carrying out aggression on their own and other people's, by the threat of what we may be able to do to them. And we, in the democratic nations of the West, must make sure that the United Nations is made the stronger to carry out that sort of policy.
Mr. Pepper.
The codes and the rules are, in many ways, can well be regarded by those who are wielding them as pie crusts, just there for the purpose of being broken, unless there's some accountability and there's some recourse at the end of the day. It has to do with the will of the people, and it has to do, in many ways, what Sir Michael says is very real. It has to do with the ability of the effects of war to be transmitted quickly to people so that they can observe exactly what is going on, without the news being managed in such a way so that they don't know.
Max Hastings, final thought.
The point that Sir Michael made, I think, is enormously important. Because we are now living in the age of almost total communication, and because wars are always going to be fought out under the eyes of the world, the moral dimension is bound to increase. And I think there is a much greater humility among the military of the world today, or the military of the civilized nations of the world today, in their attempts to respond to this moral dimension.
Max Hastings, thank you. Thank you all very much for debating these questions. Tonight we have sought to illuminate the awesome military and ethical questions of strategic bombing, questions that still reverberate quite obviously half a century on from the Battle of the Ruhr in those dark days of the Second World War. Good night.